everybody. I hope everybody has had a really good week. Hi, Raven. How are you? We're going to give everybody some time to get in here to the crypt and settle down, grab your popcorn and all that good stuff. Hi, Mikey. Hi, Dom. How are you? Hi, Damon Bard. How are you? I hope you are doing well. So we're going to just give it a little bit of time, a couple of minutes to let everybody get in here and get situated. And get ready for the final part of the Great Pestilence. Hi, Tom. How are you? Hi, John. It's good to see you too. I'm glad you're here. So this particular part, there's a lot, but there's not as much as we've had in the 3 episodes before this. So be thinking while I'm going through this, do you have any additional information on the Black Death? You know, there's just so much, and I only touched really on the high parts. Hi, Zul, how are you? When it came to the Great Pestilence, you can really drill down on so many rabbit holes with this particular topic. But if you've been to some of these places, I know we've got a lot of viewers that are from across the big pond. You know, we can talk about that, because I want to end this particular feed with just us conversating. So keep that in mind as we go through this. So it looks like we have a number of people in here already, so that is wonderful. Hi, Maud, how are you? So we'll go ahead and we'll get started. So we're doing the Great Pestilence Part 4. In Part 1, just to kind of catch up any new viewers, we talked about really the bubonic plague itself. Yes, Genevieve, we're finishing up with the Great Pestilence. So in the first episode, we talked about the actual disease, and you know what else could have been traveling with the Y. pestis bacterium, how it was spread. Not only could it have been through rats, but it could have also been through indigenous gerbils. We talked about the route that it took to get there. Then in episode 2, we talked about really kind of how hold on just a second. I have a kitty cat that is wanting to disrupt things. We talked about really how it got into medieval Western Europe, kind of the course it actually took, how different communities, cities, and countries dealt with it, and just, you know, some stories and things like that. And then in Part 3, we talked about how individuals dealt with it. You know, did they go, you know, one direction with being highly religious, or did they go in the opposite direction with just an absolute absence of morality, because they felt that, you know, hey, you know, I don't have much time left, so I might as well enjoy myself. We also talked about the art that came out of that period of time, which is absolutely beautiful art. It's very dark, it's very morose, and it is very macabre. But you know, for us, you know, a lot of us in here, that's right up my alley. That's right up Odd Mother's alley. Not the gerbils. Yeah, so yeah, a lot of scholars do believe now that it could very well have been gerbil populations, because of different like weather patterns and things like that weren't really conducive to a really good rat breeding season. So they do believe it may have also been helped out with gerbils. But we also talked about you know, some of the places that had to deal with a lot of you know, the Great Pestilence that aren't there anymore. Like the Cemetery of Innocents. Those are the bones that now fill the Paris catacombs. So what we're going to talk about tonight is we're going to kind of talk about, and it's going to kind of circle around on itself, because understand back during the feudal period, there was no separation of church and state, and there was no real separation of economy versus class. They all kind of were. If you think of governments that we know now, it's more of like arms on an octopus, whereas back then, all of that might have been better described as taste buds on a tongue. So a little bit more closer knit. So the Great Plague that ravaged Western Europe from 1347 to 1353, and there are variations on those dates, affected every person of every town and every village and every city and every nation, regardless of whether they were touched directly or not. And even the places or areas that were lucky enough to escape the plague were still transformed in one way or another. Let me get down here so I can scroll real quick. Where's my little pointer? Little pointer. Now, whether they were affected, due to trading or politics or personal, these changes, they happened really quickly in one way or another. So kind of to get into the social and environmental and economic effects of the Great Plague, many scholars believe that the Great Mortality was the most important turning point of the Middle Ages. And without it, Europe would not have entered the early modern period when it did. The Great Pestilence and population loss brought favorable results to the surviving peasants in England and Western Europe. There was an increase in social mobility because we do know that the feudal system had pretty much broken down. And as depopulation further eroded the peasantry, because it was already weakened, it weakened obligations to remain on their traditional holdings. So in other words, if they were part of a manorial system, which was part of the feudal system, and the lord of the manor or the family of the manor died, and these manors could be huge. I mean, we're not talking about like a little farm or a big farm. We're talking about a manor could include several villages as well as churches, political, housing, all kinds of trade, things like that. So they were big. But once those owners or those lords died, there wasn't really anything holding the peasantry there. Now, the feudal system never recovered. And we would see this throughout Western Europe for the most part. Land was plentiful, wages were high, and serfdom had all but disappeared. It was possible to move about and rise higher in life. So you had come out of this class system, of course, brought on by this disease, and you realized, hey, there's nothing keeping me here. And Mr. Farmer John down the road, well, all his workers died, and he's willing to pay me double to go down there and work. So we're starting to see the first elements of like capitalism and things like that. So that's going to kind of affect how things move forward. It was possible, like I said, to move about, and the rise in higher life station. Younger sons and women especially benefited. Furthermore, the plague's great population reduction brought cheaper land prices, more food for the average peasant, and a relatively large increase in per capita income among the peasantry. If not immediately, the coming century, this would happen. Since the plague left vast areas of farmland unattended, they were made available for pasture and to put more meat on the market. The consumption of meat and dairy products went up, as did the export of beef and butter from the Low Countries, Scandinavia, and North Germany. So you had more of a good diet. People were going to live longer, and they were doing well. The Black Plague also spurred the development of labor-saving technology as people began looking for new ways of accomplishing work to meet the growing demand of Europe's booming economy, and keeping in mind that they had a lack of workers now. One of the greatest inventions following the Black Plague was Johann Gutenberg's printing press. So that was directly, aspired from the fact that you had less hands, basically, which came to replace the large number of monastic copyists, which the church normally did a lot of that as well, who perished in the flames, the plague, and allowed for books to be mass-produced at an affordable price for a growing class or merchants or professionals and craftsmen. The world after the plague, with was one with more opportunity for the creative and the capable individual. So let's see what's going on in the comments real quick. I'm going to try to stretch this out just a little bit longer because we're coming to the end of a lot of the Great Plague during the 1300s. So let's see. We have Calvin here. Hi, Calvin. How are you? Let's see. John says maybe a purge now, and then it's a good thing. Yeah, but I definitely wouldn't want to go like these poor people did, regardless of what form you caught of the bubonic or the Y. pestis. It was no fun. It was no fun whatsoever. So let's see. Tom says a farm. Was it a gerbil farm? Maybe. Let's see. Yeah, it was a feudal gerbil farm. There you go. Feudal gerbil. Hi, Liz. How are you? So Liz says, my grandpa's printing company still ran an original Gutenberg. See, that's amazing. And I tell you, I really like that old print. You know, just it's kind of like typewriters. They just and LPs, vinyl LPs. There'll never be anything like them. They're just I don't know, they're just really cool. Hi Kelly, how are you? Let's see, Lori is here. Hi Lori, how are you? And Lori says, great information for relaxing to us and now. Yes, and very informative. You know, that's one thing that I always find fun is, you know, all the crazy, ridiculous tidbits of information that I have in my head. I always learn something when I do the research for these things. And so Calvin said he's doing all right. Got about 3 inches of snow here in Indiana. See, I like snow. I love snow, but that's probably because we don't get snow. So I am a wee bit jealous. And then Dominic says, you look amazing. Well, thank you. Thank you. You know, it takes a lot to keep this girlish glow after, you know, 476 years. It's a real job. No pain, no gain. Let's see. And then Liz says we had only one guy that could run it. You know, I imagine it was a trade. It really is a trade. It's not just something that, or craftsman, I should say, a craftsman at what he did. So, yes, it is. And Lori says this is relating. It is very relating. And when I was doing, you know, some of the research, even though most of this is based off some I subscribe to Great Courses Plus, and there is a doctor or a doctorate. There is a doctor out of I believe it is Purdue. She's the one that actually put on the particular like stream that I watched, and she was extremely informative. I've read a lot about the Black Plague, but for me, her lecture, her 24-piece lecture was very, very comprehensive. And Dominic says, Tom and I agree, we keep our girlish glow. Yes. All right, so let's get back to kind of what is coming out of the Great Plague and how this is going to affect even the world we live in now. So one of the things that also changed was medicine. Gone were the days really of kind of like the mumbo jumbo and the bad airs and malaise of air and things like that. Even though there was some scientific basis there, they just didn't really understand the concept of germs. It would change how we looked at medicine and the human body. Although the Black Death highlighted the shortcomings of medical science in the medieval era, it also led to positive changes in the field of medicine, with more emphasis as was placed on an anatomical investigation following the Black Death. How individuals studied the human body notably changed, becoming a process that dealt more directly with the human body in varied states of sickness and illness and health. Further, at this time, the importance of surgeons became extremely evident. Now, the government also changed. Governments also had to adapt. Land was abandoned, rents were not paid, and tax revenues declined. This had a drastic effect on war, as the wages of mercenary soldiers increased while available tax revenue decreased by more than 50%. Because remember, best guess, and they really don't know for sure, is that it could have wiped up to at least 50% of the population of medieval Western Europe. There were fewer trained soldiers available, and those that were still around wanted a lot more money or simply had better financial prospects doing something else completely. As a result of the plague, the French converted to a system of paid professional army, whereas the English had been there and done that for quite some time. Smaller armies were a result of lower taxes. Following the Black Death, there were fewer men readily available to fight in the army, and as the wages of soldiers increased, so did the cost of war. This led to the development of firearms, including cannons and muskets. Weapons also could cause a great deal of damage in battle to make up for the shortage of soldiers. Due to the increased demand for bullion and metal for guns, there was a general expansion in mining and metallurgy. In other words, the smelting of metal and the demand for metal and for mining, which brought advances in mining technology. While the Black Death killed off medieval society, it gave birth to the beginning of our own industrialized consumer society. Some scholars believe that if it were not for the Black Death and the upheaval to the social and economic order, the medieval world would have continued, at least for the next few centuries, without the keys also we associated with what brought about the Renaissance period. Now, Western Europe couldn't fully recover, believe it or not, until well into the 1500s. And I find this really interesting. As each time they were almost successful, they would be hit with another round of the plague. Interestingly, often the subsequent plagues would kill only the young children of people who had survived the great mortality to begin with. These seem to occur once every decade, but none were, of course, as virulent as the plague of 1348 to 1353. Now, following the pandemic, the shortage of manpower led to the rise in the daily wages of laborers, as they were able to market themselves to the highest bidder. The diets of laborers also improved and included more meat, fresh fish, white bread, and ale. Although landlords struggled to find tenants for their lands, changes in forms of tenanture improved estate incomes and reduced their demands. So you're seeing now like more paid rents and things like that. Hang on just one second. Hang on just. Okay. All right. Sorry about that. All right. So where were we at? Blah, 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 blah. So they had a shortage of manpower, the wages went up, and now in order to sustain the estates, it's going to be more of like a rental system or a percentage system with these estates as far as their workers. There is no longer any feudalism or serfs for the most part. But the period after the Black Death was, according to economic historian Christopher Dyer, a time of agitation, excitement, anger, antagonism, and creativity. The government's immediate response was to try to hold back the tide of supply and demand economics. And of course, we know that did not go well. The labor laws were passed in an attempt to peg wages to pre-plague levels and restrict freedom of movement for the laborers. Other laws were introduced attempting to control the price of food and even restrict which women were allowed to wear expensive fabrics. So you have a lot of what you would think of as the noble and the ruling class that are really having a hard time adjusting to the fact that there's a rising middle class. There's no longer a huge gap between the haves and the have-nots. All right, let's see. Where we at? I completely lost my place. Hold on. Because like I said, these things are going to go circle around. It sounds like I'm repeating myself, but I'm really not, because they all apply to either the religious, the economic, the social, or like government and things like that. So let's see. The landlords, yeah, okay. But this attempt to regulate the market did not work. Like I said, it didn't go over very well. Enforcement of the labor legislations led to invasions and protests. In the longer term, real wages rose as the population level stagnated with the reoccurrent outbreaks of the plague. So like I said, they didn't really start showing any real increase in population until the 1500s. Landlords struggled to come to terms with the changes in the land markets as a result of the loss of the population. There were large-scale migrations after the Black Death as people took advantage of opportunities to move to better land or to pursue trades in the towns. Most landlords were forced to offer more attractive deals to ensure tenants farmed their lands. A new middle class of men emerged, and there were people who were not born onto the land, gentry, but were able to make enough surplus plus wealth to purchase these plots of land. So like I said, you're seeing a rise in the middle class. The dramatic population change wrought by the Black Death also led to an explosion in social mobility. Governments attempted to restrict these developments, followed and generated additional tension and resentments. Many peasants revolted. So let's take a look at the chats real quick. Let's see. Let me go back to where I was. Okay, so Calvin says in 1978, he had 3 feet of snow. That's amazing. That is amazing. We had a really, really big snow. It was in the early 90s, I want to say. We actually, for the first time in my life, we had blizzard conditions for one day, believe it or not, down here in Georgia. And it was up to my knees in certain places, but it was nowhere like what up north gets. But it was fun because it was the dry snow to where you could go out and play in it for hours and it didn't soak into your clothes as fast. Because we normally get wet snow and it's just not a lot of fun after you kind of get out there and get frozen once or twice. Liz says it was a special thing when people would order Gutenberg printings. That is just so neat to me. That is just so neat. I hope that someone in that town, Liz, if they don't use that Gutenberg printing press any longer, has put it in some sort of museum or something. I would hate to think that that thing eventually went to the landfill. Let's see. Hi, Carl. How are you? And Carl says, when I watch through Frank Cleaver's name, no one sees my comments. Let's see. So Tom says, wow, Facebook just really messed up on me. Couldn't load the video for a minute there. I think they're doing some sort of updates in the background. Is what I think is going on. Because I have noticed that my Facebook has been acting strange for a little bit. And then let's see, Jillian. Hi, Jillian. She says, I would like to go to work with this look. You know, like I said, it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work to keep up this girlish glow. And then, you know, of course, you know, I get put back in the box, you know, after this is over. So, you know, I have to figure out something to do during that time. But yeah, that would be fun, wouldn't it? Metallurgy. Now, see, I can say it with you typing it. Do not ask me why. And then let's see, Dom says, this is great. Interesting, my friend. Well, thank you. I'm so glad you find it interesting. I really, really do. And then Carl says, pet peeve, cannons is not a word. Canon is its own plural. Love you, mother. Don't hurt me. I'm not going to hurt you. Kind of like moose. Let's see. And then Carl says, the 1789 revolution in France was a middle-class revolution and not a popular one. And then he also says, I fear the image of you in onesies and a robe more. You're hot, but that image. Oh. And then Tom says, so the feed keeps stopping for me and will only play smoothly on a low resolution, yet my connection is fine. I don't know if it could have anything to do with mine. We were having storms earlier, Tom, but I've got 4 bars, so I'm not sure. But we are out in the sticks. We are out in the sticks. And then Carl says, I'm from Sweden. I've had waist-high snow. Spoiler, it's overrated. Well, I would like to experience it at least once. That would be a lot of fun. Hi, Bill. How are you? Hi, Jennifer. And then Jennifer says, in my town where I live, our newspaper place where I used to work at still has our very first hand-turned printing press. Very cool. Very, very cool, Jennifer. Very nice. All right, so let's get back to this. So we know now that, of course, you know, the government / church were trying to basically, they wanted things back the way that it used to be. They liked the feudal system. They liked the serf system, you know, where people didn't have movement and didn't have opportunity to move between the classes and things like that. So they were having a really hard time. So they tried to pass a lot of laws to stop that. Of course, that didn't go over well. Many peasants did revolt. These revolts came as a direct consequence of the recurring outbreaks of plague and government's attempts to tighten control over the economy and pursue its international intentions. So, you know, they wanted everything to stay as it had. Now, gradually, those workers who had more freedom in the economy sphere also found more freedom in the political sphere, and more inclusive political institutions adopted in localities where there was significant Black death mortality. This was in part because the social and economic position of these groups had substantially improved, giving these groups greater political bargaining power. In the long run, voters in these areas acted more independently, choosing political parties that they wanted to support. Now, there were some obvious areas that actually did escape the ravages of the Great Pestilence. Some were obviously due to geographic advantages or their location, such as the Basque region between France and Spain. Now, it is bordered by mountains and the ocean to one side, and due to its cultural and location isolation. Now, Iceland, the country that escaped the Great Pestilence, due to its isolation as well, and being pretty much it's an island, and the fact that it was not deeply dependent on Mediterranean trade, but it escaped of infection, believe it or not, by just one day. Hang on just one second. I have a little kitty that is wanting to act up. Okay, so Iceland actually escaped infection by just one day. If it had happened, what Iceland avoided would have most likely have been a devastating outbreak because there was nowhere to run to. In August of 1349, an Icelandic trading ship due to return from Norway recognized evidence of an outbreak and canceled the voyage. This saved not only the country, but made them wary of trading with any areas that even had a rumor of infection. By doing this, Iceland was able to avoid the first wave of the plague and hold off infection until an outbreak in 1402. Sadly, though, this outbreak did wind up killing an estimated 50%. Now, interestingly, at that time, Iceland's population was around 60,000, and that brought that down to 30,000. So it is proposed by many scholars that Iceland's very existence today is a result of their efforts to keep the original Great Pestilence at bay. Because of the fact that they did have some reoccurring plagues after the 1402 plague, if they had had the Black Plague and then had the plague of 1402 and then the smaller outbreaks of the plague after that, it would have pretty much had wiped out Iceland altogether because of its low population to begin with. So because of that one day, it saved the population of Iceland as we know it today, is what a lot of scholars believe. Now, Finland was also another Scandinavian country that was able to escape the Black Death. Even though this country was connected to both Sweden and Norway, its isolation and low population density was a key factor in abating a major outbreak of the plague. The population at this time is estimated to be about the same as Iceland at that time, which was 60,000. But because there were no major cities in Finland, the population density was minute. I mean, it was pretty much non-existent, so to speak. What also helped Finland was its lack of trade outside the country, and would have no significant outbreak of the plague until the 15th century. So they did wind up getting hit, but it wasn't this really virulent strain of the plague. That's one of the reasons that they escaped this. Now, I know in both the first and the second episode, I did include Poland, but now there's something really weird about Poland. If you look at a lot of the newer information, you will, in many cases, see Poland as just as affected as the rest of medieval Western Europe. If you look on some of the older plague maps, there's just a dead spot, all right? And it looks as if, for whatever oddball reason, Poland just did not get the plague, okay? It went all around them, but Poland did not get the plague. Now, Poland has been a subject of debate concerning the Great Pestilence. For plague researchers, it is not uncommon, like I said, to see Poland not included in the route of the Great Plague's progression or infection. Now, while some scholars argue that Poland's reasoning for lack of plague were more cats, isolation, which they were isolated, strict quarantine of travelers, lack of strong trading networks, or could there have been some sort of natural immunity? Now, while there may or may not be any truth to this reasoning, many scholars now simply believe it was just a lack of written data from this period in Poland. And one of the main reasons for this, according to the scholar Benedicto, as well as current scholars, is that under modern world communism, there was an active effort to suppress evidence of any socio-economic impact of the Black Death during the 1340s. But they are seeing, though, because there's other places that you can look. You can look at grain records. And the reason I say grain records is because the grain prices fluctuated almost the same throughout Western Europe after the plague. The ups and downs of having less labor, more workable land, things like that. So they fluctuated. And even though, you know, communism, it's secretiveness, it's normal kind of behavior as far as, you know, we were not affected by this. The records show something different when you look at grain records, when you look at wage records. They go up, you know, after the plague. So it's pretty well surmised that they pretty much were affected just like everybody else. Now, there were reasons that some areas were not affected due to just simply oddities or by human intervention. And we're going to get into that here in just a moment. Let me just check the chats real quick. Let's see, where were we at? I'm doing well, Bill. I'm doing very well. Did I say virulent? I meant virulent. I'm sorry, Jillian. Jillian. Virulent. And then Liz says her Care Bear onesie is the best. Yeah, I like onesies, actually. They are very comfortable, but I can't sleep in them. I can't sleep in them. But they are fun to wear around the house on cold, rainy, nasty days when you just want to like drink some coffee and watch a movie. Yeah, they're the bomb. And then Frank said, wait, did Iceland essentially void the warranty? Hi, Susan. How are you? It's good to see you again as well. And thank you for sharing. And let's see. And then Damon Bard says, one time I found a newspaper print lithograph printed aluminum sheets from 1943 in very good condition. 9 sheets, 36 inches by 48 inches. It's really neat. You know, some of the old things that they used to use for things that we now don't really think a lot about. I used to have the glass plates that they would use at the old movie theaters. They would actually drop in for like the local advertisements and things like that. And my dad has one of the viewers, like the 3D Victorian viewers that you can put the pictures in. Those are really neat. And I can't remember what they're called, but they are really, really cool. And then Genevieve says, I want to be a plague researcher. Well, I tell you, if you're really interested in that kind of stuff, I can't recommend the Great Courses Plus. Like it's just the best. Like it is one that I would definitely like. I pay the $7.99 a month for that through Prime, and it's got all kinds of stuff. But yeah, and researching this, there was a fairly significant plague in England in the 1600s that I'm going to touch on just a little bit, but it does seem like it would be an interesting plague to research. And then Carl says Finland was a very sparsely populated area. It was a Swedish province, 1100 to 1809. There were a critical part of our imperial army's ability to kick Russia's ass for 600 years. Hey, Angie, how are you? Hi, Chaos. See if I've missed anybody. Nope. I think I've got everybody. Okay, let's get back to this real quick. So we're going to talk about some of the weird human interventions and some of the oddities. All right, one of the areas, believe it or not, was Milan. Now, unlike most of the Mediterranean city-states, because at that time there was no Italy, there were just a bunch of little city-states surrounding, there were a bunch surrounding Milan. Milan was an overland port city, however, and because, like we talked about in the first and second episode, the plague that moved from the east westward moved at a slower rate. So you had a lot of the port cities off the bays and off the oceans that got hit hardest first. And a lot of the islands around the boot of Italy, because the ships would stop there. Now, Milan, it was a little bit slower because they were a land port city, basically, or a trade city. This, however, would not be the reason that Milan avoided the Great Pestilence. The key difference with Milan was how it was governed. Whereas many other cities, such as Florence, was governed by a council, Milan was ruled by an individual, much like what you would think of as a king or an emperor or something like that. He did this by enacting extreme draconian preventative measures. He significantly increased the guards at the city gates. He also halted almost all travel into the city. Despite this, plague did make it into the city. Upon hearing that 3 families, and this was actually not an uncommon happening, but upon hearing that 3 families had members that were stricken ill with the plague, without hesitation, the houses were ordered walled up from the outside, entombing not only the infected people, but the uninfected family members as well. Now, as we spoke in earlier episodes, most scholars now believe that the Great Plague was most likely accompanied by other diseases. There is also question to possibilities of immunities to the plague. Now, oddly, when they go and they start researching this, and of course go down those rabbit holes, they do believe that there's possibility that some sort of inoculation of sorts may have happened. And that could have come in the form of typhus. In 1348, records indicate that there had been an outbreak of typhus in Milan, giving to the speculation that this outbreak may have offered some immunity to the Black Death. Whatever the reason, Milan's recorded death rate, which could be accurate or not, was only about 15%. Now, even more impressive was the city of Nuremberg, because Nuremberg's had a heavy network of trade. It would be easy to believe that it would have been severely affected by the Great Pestilence. However, measurable records show that Nuremberg had only a mortality rate of only around 10%. The difference here, while Milan was ruled by an individual that took extreme steps to hold back the infection of the plague, Nuremberg may have been saved by the character of the city itself. At the time, Nuremberg was unique among Western Europe medieval cities in that it had a high standard of public health. Unlike most cities within Western Europe at the time, Nuremberg not only had paved city streets, but they were regularly cleaned. And while most cities at the time had open sewers where refuse was dumped, Nuremberg by law required that all garbage was to be bagged and carted out of the city. Pigs, unlike most towns and villages, were also not allowed to run free to forage for food. In essence, Nuremberg was an exceptionally clean city. Fewer garbage meant fewer rats meant fewer fleas, and fewer fleas meant fewer outbreaks of the plague. There is also no doubt that this first wave of Black Plague that ravaged the Western medieval European world challenged the social, political, and religious and economic structures that had long been in place and in some places seemed to have completely been devastated by it. The Great Pestilence of Western Europe would give great gifts to the modern world, even as it took everything away from the people that affected it, or that it affected. Now, before you say, hey, wait a minute, Godmama, you forgot such and such, or you forgot so and so, hopefully I will touch on it, okay? Because like I said, there is so much to go along with the plague of the 1400s that, like Genevieve says, I mean, it could just be something that you could research that subject alone and have like years of subject matter. It's not really something you can cover even in a 4-part, stream. But I tried to touch on the tops of things, and we're going to get to some other things that I may have. Well, I didn't want to leave out. How about that? I didn't want to leave them out. But let's see what's going on with the comments real quick. And Angie says that she subscribed to your YouTube channel, Chaos. Thank you, Angie, for doing that. Thank you. Let's see. Rick says, pray for my girlfriend. She is in the hospital. Well, Rick, I'm really, really sorry to hear that. I hope that, whatever's going on, that she improves very quickly and is back home very soon. Let's see. And by the way, hello, Rick. How are you? I'm glad you're here. And then Jennifer says, could the city sanitation factor have had something to do with keeping the Black Plague at bay? Also, I've heard the temperature may have played a key. I'm glad you brought that up, Jennifer. We kind of, like I said, this was a 4-part series that we did. And just to kind of catch up some of our newer viewers, the reason that is one of the very reasons when you say that temperature could have had something to do with some places maybe being affected more than other places. That's the reason modern day scholars are really starting to think that what made this particular plague so deadly, not only because was Western medieval Europe overly populated and really on the verge of malnutrition, but that it was a prime time for disease to just make an outbreak completely. Because the plague normally only does well in warmer temperatures, this was showing its head in times where it really shouldn't be around. So they wonder, was there some sort of like viral tuberculosis that may have accompanied it? Could it just have been like the pneumonic form of the plague, where it's highly contagious? There's all kinds of speculations, or it even been some sort of variant of smallpox. They really don't know, because there are a lot of signs and symptoms that can seem or show symptoms that are very similar to the plague. As far as Nuremberg and the city sanitation, I think that the sanitation, and there is a lot of speculation as well, is on the fact that it would have probably have been easier to survive if people had not been so malnourished. That the bodies would have been able to fight it off a lot better. So it was a great question, a great double question. Let's see. Well, thank you, Chaos. Chaos says, Mama, you look great. Thank you. Okay. All right. So some of the places I did want to touch on. And at first what we're going to talk about, and like I said, a lot of these are kind of what came out of the Great Pestilence, and what we can, especially us morbid people, can enjoy now, that is kind of, like inspired by the Great Plague, or a like remembrance of. And one of those are the Skull Church. And there are several Skull Churches, but the one we're going to talk about tonight, it's a Gothic church standing in Sedlik, near the quaint Czech Republic city of Kutna Hora. Looks pretty ordinary from the outside, but head into the basement to discover something chilling. Known as the Skull Church, which it actually, they're all very unassuming from the outside. They're more like an ossuary. But the Skull Church, it's a macabre building, contains bodies that have been dismembered, defleshed, and reassembled into decorative features. Bones of thousands of humans were bleached, then ornately carved, and now artfully cover everything in sight. As the story goes, a local abbot made a pilgrimage in the 13th century to Jerusalem and brought back some sacred soil to be spread across the church cemetery. Word got out, making the Sedlik Cemetery one of the region's most popular places to be buried. When the plague ravaged Europe in the 14th century, nearly 30,000 victims were added to the plots. The Crusades then brought 10,000 more casualties to rest in this particular cemetery, not to mention other burials followed over time. And remember, back then, it was not uncommon for a family to purchase one plot and they all be buried on top of each other until you just could not squish any more into the ground. When the community started to construct the Gothic church in the 15th century, many bones were moved and stacked in pyramids in the ossuary beneath the new building. Everything was left undisturbed until the 1870s, when the church hired a local wood carver by the name of Francis Rent to create something beautiful from the staggering piles of bones. He definitely succeeded. After bleaching and carving the bones, he used them to decorate the holy space. Rent made chains of skulls to stretch across entryways. Chalices and crosses were constructed from hips and femurs. There is even a detailed family crest, thanking the aristocratic family that funded the initiative, adorning a wall. But the Sedlick ossuary's piece in other words, its grandest piece, is the tremendous chandelier said to incorporate every single bone in the human body at least once. So yeah, these are really cool pictures. And if you want to look up bone churches, there are aplenty. And they're all different. And guess what? Even Poland has some. All right, so the Venetian plague islands. So and I'm going to try to pronounce this, Poveglia Island is one of 166 inlets in the Venice Lagoon off the eastern coast of northern Italy. Although it has served various purposes, this place is well known for its macabre past. Tens of thousands of dead and living Black Plague victims were brought there across centuries. Corpses piled up in pits and were burned in large fires. In later years, mentally ill patients in the institution suffered horrendous tortures and experiments at the hands of a mad doctor. Now, that is debated on whether that really happened. The locals at, let me try to pronounce this again. Poveglia. The locals say Poveglia is an island of ghosts, cursed with many unhealthy spirits. Its dark reputation can be traced to a history filled with death and drama. And there are some rumors that every time it rains, that bones are uncovered. In other words, the island is pretty much built on top of bones. And that was my cat. History of Poveglia Island. The little island was first mentioned in print in the early 15th century as a safe haven from invasions by Arlek the Goth and Adelia the Hun during the decline of the Roman Empire. So numerous and easily defensible were the small islands in the lagoon that military forces left them alone. However, Poveglia had probably been populated long before then, as historical records indicate that a group of Proto-Italians first inhabited the Vento region as early as 2000 BCE. Around 864 CE, the governor, or Doge, as they were called, was killed, and 200 of his slaves fled to the island and presumably led quiet lives there. During the Chioggia War with Genoa that began in 1379, and I probably butchered that word, officials forced the residents of Poveglia Island to move to a different island in the Venetian lagoon. They built the octagonal fort and turned Poveglia into a military outpost armed with naval artillery to strictly control the lagoon. The Poveglia octagon served as a fort when the island became a naval post to protect against invasion. The first major bubonic plague that struck Italy began in 1347 in Sicily and had spread to Venice by 1348. Roughly half the Venetian population succumbed to the death. The sick lay 3 or 4 days in a bed. Workers collected the dead and threw them in the graves all day without a break. Often the dying ones and the ones too sick to move or talk were taken for dead and thrown into the pile of corpses. This taught the Venetians a great deal about the movement of disease. They deduced through observation how the disease spread and how people and ships were introducing the plague into the area. Officials realized that they needed to separate the sick and the dead plague victims from healthy individuals. Thus, they set up large burial pits for the corpses at 2 locations outside the main city. However, the number of dead bodies were piling up so rapidly that the 2 pits soon became overwhelmed. Thus, in order to manage the overflow, the city began to transport masses of bodies to the 2 islands, which are lesser known, but actually received the first plague victims. The 2 islands in the lagoon, let's see, the Santarasimo and the locality of San Martino di Santra. In the early 1400s, the Venetians invented the concept of the lazaretto. This is an institution or hospital designed for quarantinement of ill and potentially ill people. Lazaretto Vesiccio, a small island in the lagoon, was home to the first lazaretto. During an excavation on the island, archaeologists have unearthed more than 1,500 skeletal victims of the bubonic plague buried in pits. The scientists believe that there are still 1,000 more that are buried in the ground. For 2 centuries, Poveglia Island stayed unpopulated despite government efforts, such as to have monks from central Italy inhabit the island in the 1500s. They found a purpose, however, when Poveglia Island became a colony and a dumping ground for victims of the bubonic plague in 1576 and the 1630 plague. And the 1630 plague, like I said, I would like to kind of look into that, because apparently there's some information there on that one. At times, barges were necessary to ship the bodies. Anyone stricken with even mild symptoms were quickly stripped away from their families and society and taken to the island, which must have been horrific. Once there, they spent up to 40 days in quarantine, where they either died or rarely recovered. Authorities incinerated thousands of bodies on Poveglia Island to prevent further spread of the disease. Now, just to kind of touch on the plague of the 1600s, if you look up the plague, you're going to see other plagues that pop up. And one of those is the village of Eyam. It is an English village and civil parish in the Derbyshire Dales. It lies within the Peak District National Park. The history of the plague, because again, this is something they had learned. The medieval man had learned from the first wave of the bubonic plague that, you know, there's more going on here than just bad air and God coming here to, you know, exact his revenge on us for sin. Not saying they weren't still highly religious, but the history of the plague in the village began in 1665, when a flea-infested bundle of cloth arrived from London from Alexander Hadfield, the local tailor. Within a week, his assistant, George Vickers, noticed the bundle was damp and had opened it up. Before long, he was dead, and more began dying in the household soon after. As the disease spread, the villagers turned for the leadership to their rector. They introduced a number of precautions to slow the spread of the illness from May of 1666. The measures included arrangements that families were to bury their own dead and relocation of the church services to the natural amphitheater of Clucket, Delphi, allowing villagers to separate themselves and so reduce the risk of infection. Perhaps the best known decision was to quarantine, and it is known as the Plague Village, to quarantine the entire village to prevent further spread of the disease. Merchants from surrounding villages sent supplies that they would leave on marked rocks. The villagers then made holes where they would fill the holes with vinegar to disinfect the money they left as payment. The plague ran its course over 14 months, and one account states that it killed at least 260 villagers, with only 83 surviving out of a population of 350. That figure has been challenged, however, on a number of occasions, with an alternative figure of 430 dead, survivors from a population of around 800, so about 50%, a little over 50%. Surviving among those infected appeared random, as many who remained alive had close contact with those who died but never caught the disease. For example, Elizabeth Hancock was uninfected despite burying 6 children and her husband in 8 days. The graves are known as the Riley graves after the farm where they lived. The unofficial village gravedigger, Marshall Howell, also survived despite handling many infected bodies. The village's actions prevented the disease from moving into surrounding areas. And even today, they have what's called Plague Sunday. Plague Sunday has been celebrated in the village since the plague's bicentennial in 1866. Originally celebrated in mid-August, it now takes place in the Clucket Delphi on the last Sunday in August. And that, my friends, is all I've got to say about the Black Death. I hope you enjoyed that. Let's see what's going on in the comments real quick. And hey, we're right on time. I didn't go over too long. Let's see. Okay, so Carl's always got the neatest information. My Swedish National Guard unit is based on a former quarantine station island. It was built in the 1700s, I think. That's really interesting. Was it ever used? Well, I guess it was for the quarantine station, but was that just for boats, or was that also like for sicknesses? Hi, little bit. How are you? Oh, interesting. So, Doomsday says, hello, everyone. Let's just come into the chat. Was working on another historical figure. Very nice. I can't wait. I can't wait, Doomsday. You always have the neatest information. Let's see. And then Frank says, let's just say Malcolm McDonald Island. What island are we talking about? Just think when we open the Predator Pyramid in Antarctica. I have apparently missed something. All right. Okay, guys. Well, I hope you enjoyed that. Now, look, I'm going to be dark next week because my brain's tired. After all this research, my brain's tired. I'm going to take a little bit of a break and work on some behind-the-scenes things because there really is. And I have to thank Frank and Liz. They do so much here. And we are always, whether you guys see it or not, always really, really busy in the background trying to bring you guys the best content available. And we've got some surprises coming up for you guys. Ooh, I can't wait. It's going to be a lot of fun. So I think when I come back, I think we'll do another one of the weird news. Maybe we'll do like weird headlines or something because there's some funny ones out there. But I know you guys really enjoyed that, and those are fun. Those are a lot of fun. So I hope you guys have a great rest of the week. And a great weekend. Stay tuned. We've got a lot of our content is here almost every day. Let's see. I believe that Straight Hair. What is the date today? Hold on. 27th. Okay, so Straight Hair will be here next Thursday. So that will be a lot of fun. They do the first Thursday of every month. And if you have not caught them yet, you need to check them out. Fabulous musicians, a lot of fun and really good music. Then, of course, we will have the Tom and Dom show, as well as Roots Bleed Red. And then we have Cemetery Joe, who sometimes hosts the Midnight Movies on Friday. And then he comes in randomly throughout the month. So we've got a lot of neat stuff going there, a lot of things that he's working on. Then we have the Random Show coming up on Saturday, as well as Tom's World. And then I believe we've got some new content coming. I'm not sure if that's going to show up on Saturdays or not yet. I have not heard. But and then, of course, I believe Chaos and the Sideshow and Squeaks and Deface and all of them will be here this coming up Sunday, I do believe. And that's going to be a lot of fun. So if you have not, the Godzilla show tomorrow. Yes. check out the Godzilla show tomorrow. We will have Ted on from WLFE radio, and him and Frank will be discussing all things Godzilla. So if you're a Godzilla fan, definitely join in. But going back Sunday, the sideshow, and then Doomsday will be on Monday. And then on Tuesday, we have Psychic Cindy, and we have the Creepy Parlor. And I don't know what we'll do next Wednesday with me being off, but we'll figure something out. But you guys have a great weekend. Pleasant nightmares, everybody. Bye.